Hello everyone. Welcome back to ASMR Horror Stories to Sleep 2 Part 6. Just lie down, close your eyes, and drift off to sleep to the sound of a chilling horror story with soft rumbling rain and thunder. The entrance was a jagged hole in the concrete, half hidden behind a tangle of weeds and rusted fencing. Rainwater pooled at its mouth, reflecting the flicker of flashlights as the group gathered, their breath steaming in the cold night air. Maya led the way, her boots crunching on broken glass. She was the ringleader, tall, sharp-eyed, always chasing the next adrenaline rush. Behind her, Tom and Jess exchanged nervous glances, while Marcus, the quietest of the four, adjusted his camera, determined to document every moment. They were adrenaline junkies, explorers, from the nearby town of Ashfield. "This is it," Maya whispered, her voice echoing off the damp walls. "The old city tunnels. They say the city was built over them 100 years ago. Some of these passages go for miles." Tom grinned, but his hands shook as he pulled his hood tighter. "And no one's been down here in decades?" "Not legally," Maya said. "But we're not exactly law-abiding citizens, are we?" Jess hesitated at the threshold, peering into the darkness. "What if it collapses? Or there's gas or rats?" Maya rolled her eyes. "That's what makes it fun. Come on, don't wimp out now." Marcus said nothing, just switched on his camera's night vision and followed Maya into the tunnel. The others trailed behind, their footsteps muffled by layers of dust and debris. The tunnel sloped downward, swallowing them in darkness. The only sound was the drip of water and the distant hum of the city above. Their flashlights cast jittery shadows on the walls, illuminating faded graffiti and old, rusted pipes. After a few minutes, the entrance was lost behind them. The air grew colder, thicker. Every sound seemed amplified. The scrape of boots, the hiss of breath, the nervous laughter that faded quickly into silence. They reached a fork in the tunnel. Maya checked her map, a crumpled printout from a conspiracy website. Left leads to the old subway station. Right goes deeper, supposedly to a sealed-off chamber. That's where the weird stuff happened. Jess frowned. "What weird stuff?" Maya grinned, her teeth flashing in the gloom. "Disappearing workers. People hearing voices. Some say the city founders used the tunnels for rituals. Human sacrifices, even." Tom snorted, but his laugh was hollow. "You believe that?" Maya shrugged. "I believe in good stories." They took the right-hand path, the tunnel narrowing as they went. The walls were slick with moisture, and the air tasted of rust and rot. Their lights flickered, batteries already straining. Suddenly, Marcus stopped. "Did you hear that?" The group froze. In the silence, a faint sound echoed from ahead. A whisper, almost too soft to hear. It was gone as quickly as it came. "Probably just water," Tom said, though his voice trembled. They pressed on, deeper into the earth. The tunnel twisted and dipped, the ceiling lowering until they had to crouch. The air was so still it felt suffocating. Then, without warning, the ground beneath Jess crumbled. She yelped as she dropped out of sight, her scream echoing down a shaft hidden by debris. "Jess!" Maya shouted, dropping to her knees. She shined her light into the hole, but the beam vanished into blackness. There was no answer, only the echo of Jess's scream, bouncing off the ancient stone, growing fainter and fainter until it was swallowed by the dark. Maya's heart hammered as she peered into the hole where Jess had vanished. The shaft was jagged, the edges slick with slime and old, rotting roots. Tom's flashlight shook in his hand, the beam quivering as it tried to pierce the darkness below. "Jess!" Maya shouted, her voice cracking. "Can you hear me?" A faint, wet cough echoed up from the depths, followed by a strangled whimper. I'm here. I think I broke my leg. It hurts. Oh God. It hurts so much." Maya's breath caught. She glanced at Marcus, who was already unspooling the thin climbing rope from his pack. "We have to get down there," Tom hesitated, his face pale. What if the tunnel collapses more? What if? Shut up and help, Maya snapped, her voice trembling with fear and anger. They anchored the rope to a rusted pipe and Maya slipped over the edge, her hands burning as she lowered herself into the abyss. The shaft was tight, the walls pressing in, slick with filth. The smell was overwhelming, a fetid mix of earth, rot, and something metallic, like old blood. Halfway down, Maya's foot slipped on something soft. She looked down and saw a rat, its body bloated and torn open, maggots writhing in the wound. She gagged, nearly losing her grip, but forced herself to keep going. At the bottom, her boots squelched in ankle-deep muck. Her flashlight beam swept across the chamber, illuminating Jess sprawled against the far wall. Her leg was twisted at an unnatural angle, bone jutting through torn flesh, blood pooling beneath her. Jess's face was gray with shock, her eyes wide and glassy. She tried to speak, but only a thin, bubbling moan escaped her lips. Maya knelt beside her, fighting down panic. It's okay. We're here. We'll get you out. Above, Tom and Marcus called down, their voices distorted by the echoing chamber. Maya looked up, her light catching on something scrawled across the walls. Symbols crude and jagged, drawn in what looked disturbingly like dried blood. A sound shivered through the darkness, a low, guttural moan, vibrating through the stone. Maya froze, her skin prickling. It wasn't Jess. It wasn't any of them. Something was moving in the darkness beyond her light. She could hear it, a wet, shuffling scrape, like something dragging itself across the floor. The air grew colder, thick with the stench of decay. Marcus, hurry! Maya shouted up the shaft. The rope trembled as Marcus began his descent, Tom following reluctantly. As they reached the bottom, the sound grew louder, closer. The explorers pressed together, their flashlights flickering as the batteries struggled. From the shadows, a shape emerged. It was human or had been once. Skin sloughed away in strips, eyes sunken and black. Its mouth hung open, jaw unhinged, and from its throat came that terrible, rattling moan. It moved toward them, dragging a shattered leg behind it, fingers leaving bloody smears on the stone. The explorers backed away, hearts pounding, but there was nowhere to run. Jess screamed, a raw animal sound of terror and pain. The thing lunged, impossibly fast, its ruined hands closing around her ankle. Jess thrashed, her screams echoing off the walls, growing shrill and desperate as the creature's mouth closed over her calf, tearing flesh from bone. Blood sprayed across the chamber, hot and sticky. Maya grabbed a broken pipe from the floor and swung it, connecting with the thing's skull. It barely reacted, its jaws working, chewing, swallowing. Tom vomited, the sound lost in the chaos. Marcus fumbled for his camera, hands shaking so badly he dropped it in the muck. Maya screamed for them to help, to do something, but the others were frozen in horror. The creature looked up, its mouth smeared with blood, and grinned, a horrible, broken smile. And then, from the darkness, more voices began to whisper. Echoes, rising and falling, hungry and eager. They were not alone. The chamber reeked of blood and rot, the stench so thick it seemed to cling to Maya's skin. Jess's screams faded to a wet gurgle as the thing tore at her leg, splintering bone and muscle with sickening crunches. Maya's mind screamed at her to run, but her body was locked in place, eyes fixed on the creature gnawing at her friend's flesh. Tom staggered back, slipping in the muck. His flashlight beam swung wildly, illuminating the walls. Now Maya saw them clearly, covered in symbols and handprints, some smeared and fresh, others faded to brown stains. The echoes in the chamber grew louder, a chorus of whispers and guttural moans that seemed to crawl under her skin. Marcus, pale and shaking, managed to yank Maya back from the horror. "We have to move. Now!" he hissed, voice trembling. The thing that had been Jess twisted its head, something popping in its neck, and stared at them with empty, black eyes. It grinned, blood and strings of tendon hanging from its teeth. Then, impossibly, it began to speak. not with Jess's voice, but with a chorus of voices, layered and distorted, as if the walls themselves were trying to form words. Stay with us," Tom screamed, dropping his flashlight. The bulb shattered, plunging half the chamber into darkness. Maya and Marcus scrambled for the rope, but the shaft above was empty. Tom had panicked and tried to climb first, but the rope slipped from the anchor and coiled uselessly at their feet. Panic clawed at Maya's throat. "There's another way out," she shouted, remembering the old blueprints she'd studied. She grabbed Marcus's arm and dragged him toward a narrow passage at the far end of the chamber. Behind them, the thing that was Jess dragged itself after them, its shattered legs scraping the stone. More shapes moved in the shadows, crawling from cracks in the walls, limbs twisted, faces half-eaten. Their bodies a patchwork of old wounds and fresh, oozing gashes. Some were barely more than skeletons, flesh stretched tight over bone, their mouths working wordlessly as they followed. The passage narrowed, forcing Maya and Marcus to crawl on hands and knees. The air was thick with the stench of death, and the floor was slick with something warm and sticky. Maya's hand landed on something soft. She recoiled, realizing she'd pressed her palm into a mound of hair and skin, torn from some lost explorer. The whispers grew louder, now a cacophony of voices, pleading, mocking, hungry. Marcus sobbed, his breath hitching in the darkness. "They're everywhere," he whimpered. "We're not going to make it." Maya forced herself to keep moving. She could see a faint light ahead, maybe another chamber, maybe a way out. She crawled faster, ignoring the pain in her knees, the burning in her lungs. Suddenly, the floor gave way beneath her. She tumbled into a pit, landing hard on a pile of bones. The impact knocked the breath from her lungs, and for a moment she lay stunned, staring up at the jagged ceiling. Marcus landed beside her, groaning in pain. The pit was deeper than it looked, the walls slick with gore. Bones crunched under their weight, some old, yellowed with age, others still slick with blood and scraps of flesh. The remains of clothing clung to some of the corpses, faded and torn, names and faces lost to the dark. Above, the things in the tunnel peered down, their eyes glowing in the gloom. One by one, they began to drop into the pit, their bodies twisting and snapping as they landed. The sound of breaking bones and tearing flesh echoed off the stone. Maya scrambled to her feet, slipping on the bones. She saw a narrow tunnel at the far end of the pit, barely wide enough for a person to squeeze through. With a last, desperate look at Marcus, she dove for the opening, the creatures clawing at her heels. She crawled into the darkness, the sound of Marcus's screams echoing behind her, mingling with the whispers and the wet, tearing sounds of the things feasting. The tunnel closed in, tighter and tighter, until Maya could barely breathe. She forced herself forward, nails splitting as she clawed at the dirt. Every sound, her own ragged breath, the scrape of her boots, seemed to summon the thing that hunted her, its whispers growing louder, closer, more insistent. Stay with us." She didn't dare look back. Maya's lungs burned as she squeezed through the suffocating tunnel, the walls scraping her arms raw. Behind her, Marcus's screams were abruptly cut off, replaced by a sickening, wet crunch. The whispers pressed in from every direction, a cacophony of pleading and mocking voices, some shrill, some guttural, all promising the same thing: stay, become, feed. Her flashlight flickered, threatening to die, but she forced herself forward, crawling over jagged rocks and something softer, something that gave way beneath her weight with a squelch. She didn't dare look down, but the stench told her enough. Rot, old blood, the sour tang of fear. The tunnel widened suddenly, and Maya tumbled out onto a ledge above a vast, open chamber. The sight below froze her blood. The floor of the chamber was a grotesque tapestry of mutilated bodies, some fresh, some little more than skeletons with scraps of flesh clinging to bone. Limbs were scattered like broken dolls, skulls caved in, jaws frozen in silent screams. The walls were slick with gore, handprints and symbols smeared in blood and something darker. The air was thick and hot, as if the chamber itself was exhaling rot. She heard movement, wet, shuffling, the scrape of bone on stone. Shapes moved below, some crawling, some dragging themselves on ruined limbs, others standing, swaying, their faces torn and eyeless. One lifted its head, sniffing the air, and Maya saw its jaw hanging loose, tongue lolling, teeth shattered but still gnashing. The ledge trembled as something behind her began to squeeze through the tunnel. Maya's heart hammered as she scrambled to her feet, scanning for an exit. To her left, a rusted metal ladder led up to a shaft in the ceiling, but halfway up the rungs twisted into a mangled tangle impossible to climb. Above, she glimpsed a wooden door, but it was blocked by debris and unreachable. Her only hope was forward, deeper into the nightmare. She swung her dying flashlight across the chamber, catching a glimpse of a narrow corridor on the far side. But between her and escape was a corridor of corpses. Bones and pulped flesh crunched under her boots as she stepped down from the ledge, every movement sending up a fresh wave of stench. The things below turned toward her, their ruined faces splitting in anticipation. One lunged, its arms unnaturally long, fingers ending in splintered bone. Maya dodged, slipping in a pool of blood, her hand landing on a severed arm. She bit back a scream, scrambling away as the thing dragged itself after her, mouth working hungrily. Another creature, its face a mass of writhing maggots, gurgled and reached for her ankle. Maya kicked free, her boot connecting with a brittle rib. She staggered forward, every step a battle against the sucking, sticky floor. The whispers grew louder, echoing in her skull. "We see you. We want you. Join us." Her flashlight died. The world became a void of heat, stink, and sound. She fumbled for her phone, desperate for any light, but the battery was dead, drained by the cold and terror. She moved blindly, hands outstretched, feeling her way along the wall. Every few feet, her fingers brushed something slick or hairy or cold. She tried not to imagine what she touched. She tried not to breathe. Suddenly, something cold and wet wrapped around her wrist. Maya shrieked, twisting away, but the grip tightened, nails digging into her flesh. She lashed out, feeling bone give beneath her fist, and the thing let go with a guttural howl. She ran, stumbling, slipping, crawling over bodies and bones. The corridor yawned before her, a black mouth promising either escape or oblivion. Behind her, the creatures howled and gibbered, the sound echoing through the tunnels, promising that she would never leave. Maya stumbled through the corridor, her hands slick with blood and grime, her breath coming in ragged gasps. The darkness pressed in so tightly it felt like a physical weight, every step forward a battle against the urge to collapse and scream. The only thing that kept her moving was the memory of the things behind her. Their ruined faces, gnashing teeth, and the way they had torn Marcus apart. The corridor twisted, the floor uneven and treacherous. Her boots slipped in puddles of fetid water, and the air grew thicker, harder to breathe. She coughed, the sound echoing off the stone and returning to her ears in a dozen warped, mocking voices. The whispers were everywhere now, crawling into her skull, repeating her name, her fears, her memories. She passed through a narrow archway and found herself in a new chamber, larger than the last. The ceiling soared overhead, lost in shadow, and the walls were lined with old mining equipment, rusted pickaxes, shattered helmets, and lanterns crusted with ancient wax. In the center of the room, a pile of bodies had been arranged in a grotesque pyramid, limbs twisted and interlocked, faces frozen in agony. Maya's stomach heaved, but she forced herself to look away. She needed to find a way out. On the far side of the chamber, a faint glimmer of light shone from a low tunnel, barely high enough to crawl through. She moved toward it, her footsteps muffled by the thick layer of filth and bone underfoot. As she passed the pyramid, something shifted. A hand, blackened and shriveled, reached out and brushed her ankle. She recoiled, stumbling backward, as the pile began to move. Bodies twitching, jaws snapping open, empty eyes rolling in their sockets. The corpses began to drag themselves free, their mouths working as if trying to form words. "Help us!" One gurgled, its throat torn open. "Stay with us?" Another moaned, its tongue lolling from a shattered jaw. Maya screamed and ran for the tunnel, dropping to her hands and knees and crawling as fast as she could. Behind her, the bodies slithered after her, their broken fingers scraping the stone, their voices rising in a discordant wail. The tunnel was tight and suffocating, the air thick with the stench of decay. Maya's hands slipped on something wet and soft, and she realized she was crawling over a carpet of hair and skin, torn from the heads and bodies of the dead. She bit her lip until she tasted blood, refusing to let herself scream. Suddenly, the tunnel opened into a smaller chamber. Here, the walls were covered in strange symbols, painted in what looked like old, dried blood. In the center of the room stood a figure, impossibly tall and thin, its face hidden by a mask of bone and rusted iron. It turned toward her, and Maya felt its gaze pierce her soul. The thing spoke, its voice a chorus of all the whispers she'd heard, layered and inhuman. "You are lost. You are ours." Maya tried to back away, but the tunnel behind her was already filling with the crawling dead. The masked figure raised a long, skeletal hand, and the corpses stopped, their jaws hanging open in silent obedience. The thing stepped closer, its feet leaving bloody prints on the stone. It knelt before Maya, reaching out to touch her face with fingers like knives. "You came for secrets," it hissed. "You will become one." Maya screamed as the world dissolved into darkness, the whispers consuming her, her own voice joining the endless chorus of the lost. Maya's mind reeled as the masked figure's hand pressed against her cheek, the touch cold and sharp, biting into her skin. The whispers in the chamber swelled, echoing off the blood-smeared walls, folding her thoughts into their endless, hungry chant. Her body trembled, every muscle screaming to flee, but she was pinned by the thing's gaze, a gaze that felt ancient, bottomless, and utterly inhuman. The mask was a grotesque mosaic of bone and rusted iron, fused together with what looked like old sinew. Through the slits, Maya caught glimpses of black, glistening eyes. Eyes that didn't blink, didn't move, just watched and absorbed. The thing's breath was fetid, a stench of centuries-old decay, and as it exhaled, the air shimmered with a faint, oily mist. "You are lost," it intoned, its voice a chorus of the dead. "You are ours." Behind her, the tunnel writhed with the crawling dead bodies broken, faces gnawed away, jaws working as they dragged themselves forward. The masked figure raised its hand, and the corpses stilled, their eyes rolling toward Maya in silent obedience. Maya tried to scream, but her voice caught in H. From beneath the iron and bone, a black tongue flickered out, tasting the air, tasting her fear. "You sought the darkness," it hissed, "but the darkness found you first." Suddenly, the thing seized her wrist, its grip like a vice. It dragged her to the center of the chamber, forcing her down before a crude altar, an old mining cart, upended and stained dark with blood. The floor around it was littered with offerings, broken lanterns, scraps of clothing, and bones. So many bones, some still bearing the ragged remains of flesh. The masked thing began to chant, its voice rising and falling in a guttural, inhuman cadence. The dead in the tunnel joined in, their ruined throats producing a chorus of moans and wails. The sound vibrated through the stone, through Maya's bones, threatening to tear her mind apart. As the chanting reached a fever pitch, the thing produced a jagged shard of iron, its edge caked with dried blood. It pressed the blade to Maya's palm, slicing deep. Blood welled up, hot and bright, and dripped onto the altar. The stone seemed to drink it in, pulsing beneath her hand. A vision exploded behind Maya's eyes. She saw the mine as it was a century ago, filled with men and boys, their faces smeared with cold dust and fear. She saw explosions, cave-ins, bodies crushed and buried alive. She saw rituals in the dark, miners desperate to appease whatever lived below, leaving offerings, whispering prayers to things older than the earth itself. She saw the dead rise, their spirits twisted by pain and hunger, bound to the tunnels forever. She saw herself among them, her face hollow and screaming, her eyes black with loss. The vision shattered. Maya gasped, her blood still dripping onto the altar. The masked thing leaned close, its voice a whisper in her ear. "Now you belong to the hollow." The dead surged forward, their hands reaching for her, their mouths opening wide. Maya tried to fight, to scream, but the darkness swallowed her whole. She felt their hands tearing at her flesh, their teeth sinking into her skin, their voices filling her mind until she could no longer remember her own. In the tunnels above, the echoes continued, footsteps, voices, the sound of pickaxes on stone. Some say you can still hear Maya's scream, lost in the endless dark, calling for help that will never come. And deep below, the masked thing waits, hungry for the next soul to wander too far into the hollow. Maya's consciousness flickered in and out, her body numb, her mind battered by the relentless chorus of the dead. The masked figure loomed over her, its iron and bone face inches from hers, its black eyes reflecting 1,000 writhing shadows. Around her, the crawling corpses pressed closer, their mouths working, tongues lolling, voices rising in a fevered chant. She felt her blood drip onto the altar, each drop absorbed by the stone, each pulse of pain binding her tighter to the hollow. The thing's grip on her wrist was unbreakable, cold as the grave. The whispers grew louder, overlapping, until she could no longer tell her own thoughts from theirs. Suddenly, a new sound cut through the cacophony, a distant, rhythmic pounding, like the echo of pickaxes on stone. For a moment, the chanting faltered. The masked figure cocked its head, listening. The corpses froze, their heads turning in unison toward the far end of the chamber. Maya's vision blurred. In the flickering gloom, she saw shapes moving in the darkness. Shadowy figures, lanterns swinging, voices calling out in a language she didn't understand. She realized with a jolt of terror that she was seeing the past. Miners, their faces haggard and desperate, stumbling through the tunnels, fleeing from something unseen. The air grew colder, thick with the scent of earth and blood. The pounding grew louder, shaking dust from the ceiling. The masked figure hissed, its grip tightening painfully. "They come again. Always they come, always they die. The hollow is never full." The vision shifted. Maya saw explosions, cave-ins, men crushed beneath tons of rock, their screams echoing through the endless dark. She saw the miners' ghosts wandering the tunnels, their lanterns flickering, their eyes hollow with hunger and loss. Some were angry, some pleading, all trapped by the curse of the hollow. A curse born of greed, sacrifice, and ancient rituals performed in desperation. The masked thing leaned close, its voice a rasping whisper. "You are one of them now. You will wander, you will hunger, you will call to the living. The hollow is your home." Maya tried to scream, but only a thin, broken moan escaped her lips. The corpses surged forward, their hands closing around her arms, her legs, her throat. She felt herself being pulled down into the pile of bodies, the weight of the dead crushing her, suffocating her, claiming her as their own. As her vision faded, she heard the miners' voices, some pleading for release, some cursing the living, some simply weeping. She understood now why the tunnels were never silent, why the echoes never faded. The hollow was alive, fed by pain and fear, and it would never let her go. Above, in the world of the living, the mine stood silent and abandoned, its entrances choked with weeds and rubble. But those who dared to venture close at night sometimes heard the sound of pickaxes, the wail of voices, the echo of footsteps in the dark. Some claimed to see lanterns swinging in the depths, or to feel a cold hand brush their shoulder, or to hear a voice whisper their name. And deep below, in the heart of the hollow, Maya's voice joined the endless chorus of the lost, calling, pleading, warning any who would listen. "Stay away, don't come down here. The hollow is hungry, the hollow is waiting." The darkness in the hollow was absolute, swallowing Maya's senses until she could no longer tell if her eyes were open or closed. She drifted somewhere between agony and numbness, her mind battered by the endless chorus of the dead. Their voices were everywhere, rising from the bones beneath her, echoing from the blood-slick walls, whispering through the tunnels like a fever dream. She was not alone. The crawling dead pressed around her, their hands cold and insistent, their mouths mouthing words she could not bear to hear. Somewhere above, the masked figure watched, its iron and bone face impassive, its black eyes reflecting the writhing mass below. The ritual was complete. Maya was part of the hollow now, her blood and pain feeding the ancient curse that bound the mine. But the hollow was never satisfied. It was always hungry, always reaching for more. The stories told above ground, of footsteps echoing in empty tunnels, of voices calling out from the dark, of shadows moving where no living thing should be, were true. The Black Diamond Mine, the Mushroom Mines of Kentucky, the Sterling Hill Mine, each haunted by its own chorus of lost souls, each echoing with the same warning: stay away or be consumed. In the endless night, Maya felt herself changing. Her memories faded, replaced by a gnawing hunger and a desperate need to be heard. She joined the others, her voice rising in the terrible song of the hollow, calling to the living, pleading for release, cursing those who disturbed their rest. Sometimes, she caught glimpses of the world above, a flicker of lantern light, the distant sound of laughter, the tremor of footsteps on stone. She reached out, her hands brushing the walls, her voice rising in a whisper that no one wanted to hear. Don't come down. Don't listen to the echoes. The hollow is hungry. The hollow is waiting. Yet above, the legends only grew. People came, drawn by curiosity or greed or the thrill of the unknown. Some claimed to see apparitions in the tunnels, to feel a cold hand on their shoulder, to hear their name whispered in the dark. Others vanished, leaving behind only rumors and a chill that never faded. The masked thing watched it all, patient and eternal. It had seen centuries pass, had fed on countless souls, and would feed on countless more. The hollow was its domain, its curse, its kingdom of silence and screams. And so the cycle continued. The mine remained abandoned, its entrances slowly reclaimed by earth and time. But the echoes never faded. The dead never rested. The hollow waited, always hungry, always listening for the next voice to join its endless, haunted choir. The hollow's hunger was never sated, and Maya's soul, now fused with the chorus of the lost, began to sense the deeper layers of the mine's curse. She was not the first to be claimed, nor would she be the last. Over the centuries, the tunnels had become a labyrinth of suffering, haunted not just by the dead, but by things older and stranger, spirits born of darkness, greed, and the endless echo of human fear. Sometimes, in her drifting consciousness, Maya glimpsed the other denizens of the deep. There were the knockers, small, twisted figures with mouths stretched from ear to ear and eyes like black stones. They skittered along the walls and ceilings, their gnarled fingers tapping out warnings or luring the living deeper with strange, rhythmic knocking. Miners once left them gifts, bits of bread, scraps of clothing, hoping to appease them, but the knockers were fickle. Sometimes they saved lives. More often, they led the greedy to their doom. She saw the Coblinaws too, the Welsh mine fairies, their miniature miner outfits caked with grime, their faces neither kind nor cruel. They watched the newcomers with ancient, unblinking eyes, sometimes pointing toward veins of or sometimes to hidden shafts that dropped into nothingness. The living rarely saw them, but Maya saw them always, flitting at the edge of her vision, giggling in voices like the clatter of stones. And deeper still, she sensed the presence of the Shubin, the spirit of the Donbass mines, a shadowy figure wrapped in a heavy coat, his torch flickering with unnatural blue fire. Some said he was the soul of a murdered miner, doomed to wander forever. Others whispered he was a cruel overseer, returned to torment the living and the dead alike. Maya felt his gaze sometimes, cold and pitiless, as he wandered the endless galleries, searching for trespassers. Above, the stories multiplied. Locals whispered of apparitions in the graveyards near the mine, of voices calling from beneath the earth, of shadows that moved against the moonlight. Some miners refused to work, terrified by the forewarnings. Strange noises, slamming doors, canaries dying for no reason, spectral figures glimpsed in the gloom. Others pressed on, driven by desperation or greed, and vanished without a trace. The masked figure, the ancient guardian of the hollow, remained, orchestrating the ritual of suffering. It watched as new souls arrived, a pair of thrill-seekers with cameras and bravado, a desperate man searching for lost treasure, a child who wandered too far from the surface. Each was welcomed with the same cold ceremony. Each was stripped of hope and memory. Each became another voice in the endless, echoing dark. Sometimes, Maya's voice rose above the others, her warning clearer, sharper, more desperate. Leave your gifts and go. Do not follow the knocking. Do not listen to the whispers. The hollow is never full. But curiosity and greed were stronger than fear. The living kept coming, and the dead kept growing. In the world above, the mine entrances decayed, choked by weeds and time. Yet on certain nights, those who lingered near the old shafts swore they heard the knocking, soft at first, then louder, echoing through the stone like a heartbeat. Some claimed to see small figures darting through the shadows, their mouths split in impossible grins. Others felt a chill, as if something brushed past them, searching for a way out. The hollow waited, patient and eternal. This hunger would never end. The hollow's grip on Maya was absolute, but her awareness, now stretched thin and spectral, began to sense the full weight of the mine's haunted legacy. She was no longer a single soul, but part of a vast, restless multitude. A procession of miners, explorers, and the curious, all claimed by the darkness over centuries. In the endless night, Maya drifted through the tunnels, sometimes alone, sometimes surrounded by the other lost. She saw them as they had been and as they were now, faces twisted by terror, eyes wide with the memory of their final moments. Some still clutched phantom pickaxes, endlessly repeating the motions of their last day's labor. Others wandered, hands outstretched, searching for lost friends or the way home, their voices thin and hopeless. But there were others, too, spirits deeper and stranger than the dead miners. The knockers and cobblenaws still roamed, their laughter echoing through the stone. Sometimes, Maya glimpsed them leading a living miner to safety, and sometimes she saw them lure the greedy or disrespectful into hidden shafts, never to return. The knocker's tapping was a constant rhythm, sometimes a warning, sometimes a death sentence. The mine itself seemed to breathe, its walls pulsing with a life of their own. There were places where the stone wept blood, and others where the air shimmered with cold, blue fire. In some shafts, the ghosts of miners gathered, singing dirges or wailing in unison, their voices rising and falling like the tide. The sound was so powerful that Maya felt it in her bones, a vibration that threatened to tear her apart. Sometimes, Maya's awareness surfaced near the world above. She watched as new workers or thrill-seekers approached the sealed entrances, drawn by stories of hidden treasure or the thrill of the forbidden. She tried to warn them, her voice rising in the wind that whistled through the broken boards. Stay away. The hollow is hungry. But the living rarely listened. They crossed themselves, left offerings, bread, coins, even bits of clothing, hoping to appease the spirits. Some heeded the warnings, turning away at the first sign of knocking or a sudden chill. Others pressed on, ignoring the omens, and vanished without a trace. The legends grew. In the nearby graveyards, locals reported seeing spectral figures at night, drifting among the tombstones, their faces pale and hollow. Some heard voices calling from beneath the earth, begging for release or warning of disaster. When the wind was right, the sound of pickaxes and muffled drums echoed from the hills, as if the miners below were still at work, forever trapped in their endless toil. And through it all, the masked figure remained, a silent sentinel at the heart of the hollow, orchestrating the endless ritual of suffering and remembrance. It watched as the living and the dead mingled, as the mine claimed new souls, as the old superstitions proved true again and again. The hollow was a wound that would never heal, a place where pain and memory fed on each other, growing stronger with every passing year. Maya's voice, now part of the chorus, rose with the others in a final, desperate warning. Remember us, respect the dead, leave the hollow in peace, or join us in the endless dark. But the hollow was never silent, and its hunger was never sated. The hollow's restless dark was ruptured one night by a new disturbance. Fresh voices, bold and reckless, echoing down the sealed shaft. Maya, now a fragment of old drifting in the black, sensed them instantly. Two men and a woman, young, their laughter forced and brittle, their footsteps loud against the stone. They had broken through a rusted grate, ignoring the warnings etched in every language on the surface. Unlike the miners of old, these intruders carried LED lanterns and cameras, their faces bathed in ghostly blue light. They called out to each other, their voices bouncing off the walls, oblivious to the way the air thickened with every word. The hollow listened, and Maya felt the ancient hunger stir. As the trio pressed deeper, the tunnels seemed to shift around them. Passages that had been mapped and measured now twisted into impossible angles. Walls closing in, ceilings lowering, the very stones sweating with a cold, black ooze. The woman, Sarah, was the first to sense it. Her laughter faded, replaced by a shudder. "It's too quiet," she whispered, her voice barely audible over the hum of their equipment. The men, Jake and Tyler, teased her, but soon their bravado cracked. The knocking began, soft at first, then louder, echoing from all directions. Jake swung his light, catching a glimpse of something small and pale darting across the floor. "Did you see that?" he hissed, but Tyler only laughed, desperate to keep fear at bay. They passed a side tunnel where the walls were slick with a pulsing, red glow. Shadows moved within, shapes with too many limbs, their faces a blur of agony and hunger. Sarah stumbled, her hand brushing the wall. Her skin blistered instantly, the pain electric. She screamed, but the sound was swallowed by the tunnel, returned as a chorus of mocking voices. Jake tried to lead them back, but the path behind had vanished. The tunnels looped and folded, the stone groaning as if alive. Their lights flickered, batteries draining in minutes. The knocking grew frantic, now joined by the distant wail of a siren. An old mine alarm, triggered by nothing, echoing from the depths. Then the first true horror emerged. A figure impossibly tall, its limbs stretched and jointed wrong, skin translucent and crawling with veins. Its mouth was a vertical slit, opening from chin to brow, lined with rows of black, broken teeth. It moved without sound, gliding across the stone, trailing a stench of ammonia and rot. Sarah froze, her eyes wide, as the thing leaned in and inhaled deeply. Her breath misted in the cold air, drawn from her lungs by an invisible force. She tried to scream, but her voice was gone, stolen, devoured, leaving only a hollow gasp. Jake and Tyler ran, but the tunnels betrayed them. The stone under Jake's feet gave way, plunging him into a shaft lined with writhing, eyeless faces. They reached for him, their mouths working in silent screams, their hands pulling him down, until his flashlight was just a distant, spinning star in the black. Tyler, alone, staggered into a chamber where the walls pulsed with veins of sickly green light. The air buzzed with whispers, each one a memory ripped from his mind. His mother's voice, a childhood song, the last words of a friend. The masked figure waited in the center, its eyes two pits of endless night. Tyler fell to his knees, sobbing, as the thing reached out and pressed a finger to his forehead. His memories unraveled, spilling onto the floor like wet ribbons. He forgot his name, his purpose, his fear, until nothing was left but the hollow's hunger. Maya watched, powerless, as the hollow claimed them. The echoes of their terror joined the chorus, bright and fresh, feeding the ancient dark. The hollow was never full, but tonight it was satisfied. The hollow pulsed with new energy as the living were devoured. Maya felt it. An electric rush, a surge of memories and terror. the raw essence of 3 more souls torn apart and woven into the chorus. The darkness feasted, and the tunnels thrummed with a sick joy. Sarah's stolen breath drifted through the mine, a pale mist that curled around the dead and the damned. She wandered now, her body insubstantial, her voice a thin, keening wail. Sometimes she remembered her name, but mostly she remembered the pain, the blistering touch, the way her lungs had emptied into the thing's maw, the endless, suffocating silence that followed. Jake's descent was worse. He fell for what felt like hours, tumbling through a shaft lined with faces. Some weeping, some grinning, some gnawing at the stone with broken teeth. When he landed, the faces peeled away from the walls, crawling over his body, pressing their mouths to his skin. They drank his memories, his hopes, his last shreds of sanity, until he was nothing but a shell, a new mask for the Hollows collection. Tyler's fate was the most grotesque. The masked figure's touch unraveled him, memory by memory, until he was reduced to a babbling, empty thing. His body twisted, bones popping and reforming, until he resembled the other horrors that stalked the tunnels. Limbs too long, mouth a vertical gash, eyes wide and blind. He became a hunter, compelled to seek out warmth, sound, and fear, to drag the living into the dark and feed the endless hunger. Maya watched it all, her spirit shivering in the cold currents of the mine. She tried to scream, to warn the next intruders, but her voice was only one among thousands, lost in the storm of echoes. The Hollows' feast was never ending, its appetite growing with every soul it consumed. And yet, something was changing. The Hollows' hunger had grown so great, its power so swollen, that the boundaries between worlds began to thin. Shadows leaked from the mine into the world above. On the surface, people began to see things that should not exist. Shadows moving against the grain of the light. Faces in puddles that did not belong to the living. The sound of knocking coming from beneath their beds at night. One night, a child in the nearby town awoke to find her room filled with a cold, blue mist. She heard voices whispering from the floorboards, calling her name in a dozen different tongues. She saw a tall, thin shadow at the foot of her bed, its mouth opening wide, wider, impossibly wide. The child screamed, and her parents rushed in, but the shadow was already gone, leaving only a patch of frost and a faint, echoing laugh. The town grew restless. People spoke in hushed tones of the old mine, of the curse that had always lingered but now seemed to be spreading. Pets vanished. Nightmares became common. Some woke with bruises shaped like handprints, or with dirt under their nails, or with the taste of blood in their mouths. The Hollow was no longer content to wait for victims to come to it. It was reaching out, hungry, eager, and Maya knew. Somehow, that soon, the world above would not be safe. The Feast of Echoes had only just begun. The Hollow's appetite was no longer confined to the labyrinth below. Each new soul it devoured sent ripples through the earth, cracks that spread like veins of rot. Maya, her consciousness now a drifting wisp in the mine's black arteries, felt the change as a gnawing electric ache. The boundary between the Hollow and the world above had thinned to a membrane, fragile, trembling, ready to tear. It began subtly. The townspeople grew pale and sleepless, plagued by dreams of suffocation and cold hands dragging them down. Children woke screaming, claiming to see faces in the walls or hear voices beneath the floor. The local priest found the church's stone foundation sweating with a foul, black ichor. He tried to bless the ground, but the water in his font turned red and stank of rust. The animals were the first to flee. Dogs howled at the mine entrance, then vanished into the woods. Birds avoided the area, their songs replaced by a heavy, oppressive silence. Even insects seemed to avoid the ground above the tunnels, leaving the earth strangely still. One night, a group of teenagers dared each other to sneak into the mine. They made it only a few yards past the old grate before the darkness swallowed their flashlights. The last thing anyone heard was their laughter, abruptly cut off by a wet, echoing shriek that rattled windows in the town. Their bodies were never found, but for weeks afterward, Their voices could be heard on the wind, crying, pleading, sometimes laughing in a way that made the skin crawl. The masked figure, the Hollow's ancient guardian, grew stronger with each soul. Now it could move through the tunnels with ease, its presence warping the stone, leaving trails of frost and blood. It began to appear in the dreams of the living, standing at the foot of beds, peering through windows, beckoning with a finger made of bone and rusted iron. Some who saw it woke with nosebleeds, others never woke at all. Maya's spirit was pulled upward, drawn by the Hollow's expanding hunger. She drifted through the cracks, glimpsing the world above. A mother staring in horror at her baby monitor, watching a shadow lean over her sleeping child. A man digging in his basement, uncovering a tunnel that hadn't been there the night before. A woman finding her reflection replaced by a grinning, eyeless face, its mouth working in silent laughter. The blight spread further. Crops failed, wells soured. The town's clock tower stopped at midnight, its bell tolling 13 times, each note a hollow, metallic groan that set teeth on edge. One evening, the mayor called a meeting in the old schoolhouse. As she spoke, the lights flickered and died, plunging the room into darkness. The sound of knocking filled the air, slow and deliberate, coming from beneath the floorboards. When the lights returned, half the townspeople were gone, vanished, leaving only cold, wet footprints and the faint, coppery scent of blood. Panic took hold. Some tried to flee, but the roads twisted back toward town, no matter which direction they drove. Others barricaded their homes, stuffing rags in the cracks and praying for dawn. But the Hollow was everywhere now, its whispers leaking through walls, its shadows stretching across every room. Maya, trapped in the current of the Hollow's will, tried to resist, to scream a warning. But her voice was lost in the tide, drowned by the chorus of the damned. The Hollow was awake, and it wanted the world. The town of Ashfield no longer slept. Every window glowed with candlelight, every door was double-locked, and the streets, once filled with laughter and the scent of summer, were now haunted by shadows that twisted and stretched in impossible directions. The Hollow's reach was everywhere, in the flicker of the street lamps, in the cold that seeped from the ground, in the echoing knocks that came from beneath the floorboards at midnight. It was in this nightmare that a handful of survivors gathered in the old library, drawn together by desperation and a shared sense that something ancient was hunting them. Among them was Father Callahan, his hands raw from clutching a rosary that no longer brought comfort. Evelyn, the town's historian, whose research had uncovered the mine's cursed legacy. And Grace, a teenage girl with haunted eyes who claimed to hear voices in her dreams. Evelyn spread a map of the mine across the table, her fingers trembling. "It started with the founders," she whispered. "They dug too deep, found something they shouldn't have. The first cave-in killed dozens. The survivors tried to seal the tunnels, but the damage was done. There are records of rituals, sacrifices meant to appease whatever they awakened." Father Callahan's voice was hoarse. "We need to bless the ground, seal the Hollow with prayer." Grace shook her head, her voice barely a whisper. "It's not enough. The thing down there, it doesn't care about prayers. It wants us to remember. It wants us to pay for what was done." The group argued, fear fraying their nerves, until Grace spoke again. Her voice suddenly not her own, but layered, echoing, as if 100 lost souls spoke through her. "The masked one is the gate. Break the mask, break the chain. Blood for blood. Memory for memory." Evelyn recoiled, recognizing the words from a diary written by a miner's widow a century ago. "We have to go down," she said, her voice hollow. "We have to finish what they started, or this will never end." Outside, the wind howled, carrying with it the sound of distant knocking and the faint, pitiful cries of those already lost. The survivors prepared, packing lanterns, matches, relics from the church, and a battered copy of the miner's diary. Grace, pale and trembling, clutched a locket that had belonged to Maya, a name she'd begun to whisper in her sleep. As they approached the mine's entrance, the earth itself seemed to resist them. The ground was soft, sucking at their boots. The air was thick, heavy with the scent of iron and rot. Shadows flickered at the edge of their vision, and the cold was so intense it burned. Inside, the tunnels had changed. The walls pulsed with veins of black and red, and the air was alive with whispers, pleading, mocking, promising release or damnation. The group pressed on, guided by Grace's dreams and Evelyn's research, deeper and deeper, until the world above was nothing but a memory. At the first fork, they found a message scrawled in blood. "Break the mask, remember us, or join us." Father Callahan crossed himself, his faith wavering. Evelyn's hands shook as she read the diary aloud, the words echoing in the suffocating dark. Grace led the way, her eyes unfocused, her lips moving in silent prayer or curse. Behind them, the Hollow's children stirred, drawn by the living, hungry for new voices to join the endless, echoing choir. The air grew colder as the group pressed deeper, their lanterns casting jittery halos against walls that seemed to breathe. The tunnels twisted, folding in on themselves, the stones slick with condensation and streaked with what looked disturbingly like veins of congealed blood. Every sound, the crunch of gravel, the hiss of breath, was magnified, as if the Hollow itself was listening, savoring their fear. Grace led with uncanny certainty, her eyes glazed, her steps unwavering even as the others faltered. At every branching tunnel, she paused, head cocked as if hearing something just beyond the edge of sound. Sometimes she whispered, "Not that way," or "They're waiting there." The others followed, too frightened to question her, too desperate to turn back. Father Callahan muttered prayers under his breath, clutching his rosary until his knuckles bled. The beads grew colder with every step, and sometimes he felt them pulse, as if something inside them was alive. Evelyn read from the diary, her voice trembling, recounting stories of the original miners. Men who vanished, men who returned changed, men who clawed at their own faces in the night. At a collapsed junction, the group was forced to crawl on hands and knees. The ceiling pressed low, and the air was thick with the stink of rot and earth. Evelyn's hand brushed something soft and yielding. She recoiled, realizing she touched a clump of hair still attached to a patch of scalp. She stifled a scream, but the others saw, and their faces blanched. The tunnel opened into a larger chamber, its ceiling lost in shadow. Here, the walls were covered in symbols, some carved, some painted in blood, some gouged by desperate fingers. In the center stood an altar of broken stone, and behind it, a figure. The masked one, impossibly tall, draped in rags and rusted chains, its face a patchwork of bone and corroded iron. It did not move, but the air around it shimmered with cold. The whispers grew louder, a storm of voices, pleading, accusing, some familiar, some monstrous. Grace stepped forward, the locket in her hand glowing faintly. The masked figure's head turned, and the mask's black eyes fixed on her. Evelyn read aloud, "Break the mask, break the chain. Blood for blood, memory for memory." The masked one's mouth split open, impossibly wide, revealing rows of jagged, broken teeth. It spoke, its voice a thousand voices, all layered and wrong. "You come to end what cannot end. You come to feed the hollow." Father Callahan stepped forward, raising his rosary. "In the name of the Father, the Son." The masked one's arm lashed out impossibly fast. The rosary snapped, beads scattering across the stone. Callahan staggered, clutching his chest, blood seeping between his fingers as the cold ate into his heart. Evelyn screamed. Grace, tears streaming down her face, held up the locket. "Maya, help us," she whispered. The chamber erupted in chaos. The shadows on the walls peeled free, writhing toward the survivors, their mouths open in silent screams. The masked one advanced, dragging its chains, the air warping with every step. Evelyn fumbled in her bag, pulling out a shard of old, blackened glass, the last relic of the original miners, said to hold a piece of the hollow's soul. She thrust it toward the masked one, and for a moment, the thing recoiled, its mask cracking, the voices inside it shrieking in agony. Grace fell to her knees, the locket burning in her hand. "Maya!" she screamed, her voice echoing through the tunnels. And somewhere in the darkness, Maya heard and answered. A cold wind swept through the chamber, rattling the chains and sending the scattered rosary beads rolling across the stone. The masked figure staggered, its iron and bone face spiderwebbed with cracks, black ichor seeping from the wounds. The air pulsed with the agony of 1,000 trapped souls, their screams rising in a crescendo that threatened to shatter the mind. Grace clutched the burning locket, her voice a desperate plea. "Maya, please, help us." And then, from the shadows, a shape emerged, a figure wreathed in pale, flickering light. Maya. Her form was insubstantial, her eyes hollowed by suffering, but her presence was undeniable. The dead in the walls seemed to hush, their whispers pausing as Maya stepped forward, her gaze fixed on the masked one. The masked figure recoiled, its chains writhing like serpents. For the first time, it seemed to hesitate. Maya's voice, when it came, was both her own and not, layered with the echoes of all she had become in the hollow. "You have fed on pain and memory. You have turned the lost into your choir. But you are not the only one who remembers." Evelyn, trembling, pressed the shard of blackened glass into Maya's spectral hand. Where Maya touched it, the glass glowed with an inner fire, burning away the grime of centuries. The masked one shrieked, its mask splitting further, the voices within it wailing in terror and rage. Father Callahan, gasping and pale, managed to croak a prayer, his words joining Maya's in a strange, powerful harmony. The walls of the chamber began to tremble, dust falling in sheets from the ceiling. The altar cracked down the middle, a fissure opening at its base. The shadows that had peeled from the walls now circled the masked one, their faces twisted with longing and hate. Maya stepped closer, her form growing brighter, more solid with every step. She held the locket in one hand, the burning glass in the other. "You are not the gate, you are the jailer, and your time is over." With a cry that was both agony and release, Maya pressed the glass to the mask. The iron and bone sizzled, the mask crumbling as if eaten by invisible flames. The masked one howled, its chains snapping, its body convulsing as the spirits trapped within it burst free, swirling around the chamber in a storm of light and shadow. Grace and Evelyn shielded their eyes as the chamber filled with the blinding glow of 100 souls released. The ground shook, the fissure at the altar widening, threatening to swallow everything. Maya turned to Grace, her face softening for a moment. "Remember us. Tell them what happened here. Don't let them forget." Then she stepped into the fissure, dragging the last shreds of the masked one with her. The ground roared, the altar collapsed, and the chamber was plunged into darkness. When the dust settled, Grace and Evelyn were alone. The chains, the altar, and the masked one were gone. Only the locket remained, cold and silent in Grace's hand. Somewhere far below, the hollow screamed, then fell silent for the first time in centuries. The silence that followed Maya's sacrifice was unnatural, so complete it pressed against Grace's eardrums, leaving her dizzy and unmoored. The oppressive cold in the chamber began to lift, replaced by a subtle warmth, as if the sun were shining somewhere far above. For the first time since entering the hollow, Grace could breathe without feeling the weight of 1,000 unseen hands pressing on her chest. Evelyn staggered to her feet, coughing dust from her lungs. She stared at the empty space where the masked figure had stood, her mind struggling to process what she'd witnessed. The walls, once alive with writhing shadows and blood-red veins, were now dull stone, their symbols fading as if scrubbed away by centuries of rain. But the hollow was not done with them yet. A deep rumble shook the ground, sending cracks spidering through the floor. The fissure at the altar widened, belching a hot, sulfurous wind. Stones fell from the ceiling, shattering on the ground with deafening crashes. The mine was collapsing, closing in on itself, desperate to seal away the wound that had finally been cleansed. "Grace, we have to go." Evelyn grabbed Grace's arm, dragging her toward the tunnel they'd entered. The way was already half blocked by rubble, the air thick with choking dust. Behind them, the fissure yawned wider, swallowing the altar and the remnants of the ritual. They scrambled over fallen stones, their lantern flickering wildly. The tunnels twisted, but now Grace felt a strange pull, an instinct guiding her upward, toward the faintest hint of fresh air. The whispers were gone. The only sound was the thunder of collapsing earth and their own ragged breathing. As they neared the exit, a final obstacle awaited. A wall of debris, blocking the last stretch of tunnel. Evelyn clawed at the stones, her fingers bleeding, but it was Grace who found a narrow gap near the floor. She squeezed through, ignoring the pain as jagged rocks tore at her skin, and pulled Evelyn after her. They emerged into the night, gasping, their faces streaked with blood and dust. Behind them, the mine entrance shuddered and collapsed, sending a plume of earth and stone into the sky. The ground settled, and the oppressive presence that had haunted Ashfield for generations lifted, as if a storm had finally passed. For a long moment, Grace and Evelyn sat in the grass, staring at the ruined mine. The silence was complete, but this time it was peaceful. A silence filled with the promise of healing, not the threat of horror. Evelyn wept, her tears washing streaks through the grime on her face. Grace held the locket, now cool and inert, and whispered Maya's name. She didn't know if Maya could hear her, but she hoped her sacrifice had brought peace to the lost souls of the Hollow. As dawn broke over Ashfield, the survivors rose and began the slow walk back to town, carrying with them the memory of what they had seen, and the knowledge that some wounds, once healed, must never be reopened. Grace and Evelyn returned to Ashfield as the first rays of morning cut through the mist. The town was changed. The air felt lighter, the oppressive cold gone, but the streets were empty, windows shuttered, and the silence was heavy with the knowledge of what had been endured. As they walked, the few townspeople who remained emerged slowly from their homes. Some wept openly, running to embrace the survivors. Others simply stared, haunted, as if expecting the shadows to return at any moment. The mayor, gaunt and sleepless, met them at the church steps. "Is it over?" she asked, voice trembling. Evelyn nodded, though her expression was grim. "The mine is gone, the hollow is sealed, but we can't forget. We can't let anyone ever dig there again." Grace clutched the locket, feeling its weight, a reminder of Maya, of the lost, of the price paid to end the nightmare. She felt the eyes of the townspeople on her, and for a moment, she heard the faintest whisper in her mind. A voice, gentle and grateful. "Thank you." Father Callahan did not return. His sacrifice was honored at a small, hastily arranged service. The church was packed, the air thick with incense and sorrow. Evelyn read from the miner's diary, her voice steady. She spoke the names of the lost, and for the first time the town listened, truly listened, to the pain that had haunted their history. That night, Grace dreamed of the mine one last time. But it was different now. The tunnels were empty, the walls clean, the air warm. She saw Maya standing in the light, her face peaceful, her eyes clear. All around her, the lost souls drifted upward, dissolving into the dawn. "Remember us," Maya said. "Tell the truth. Let us rest." Grace woke with tears on her cheeks, the locket clutched in her fist. She knew what she had to do. In the weeks that followed, Grace and Evelyn worked to record everything. Every story, every name, every warning. They put up signs at the old mine site, built a memorial, and held a gathering each year to remember the lost. The town changed, slowly, painfully, but it endured. Some scars never faded. There were nights when the wind seemed to carry faint echoes from the earth, and some children still dreamed of knocking beneath their beds. But the terror was gone. The hollow was sealed, and the dead were at peace, or so they hoped. One evening, as Grace walked past the ruined mine, she felt a chill at her back. She turned, heart pounding, but saw only the empty field, the grass waving in the wind. Still, she thought she heard a faint, familiar voice. Maya's, gentle but firm. "Never forget. Never dig too deep." Grace nodded, whispering a promise to the dusk. And as night fell over Ashfield, the earth was quiet. The hollow slept, its hunger sated, its secrets buried, at least for now. Years passed. Ashfield rebuilt, slowly shedding the pall of dread that had once clung to every corner. The mine remained sealed, the earth above it left fallow, ringed by wildflowers and the weathered stones of the memorial. Each year, on the anniversary of the collapse, the townspeople gathered to read the names of the lost and to lay offerings. Bread, salt, a lock of hair, at the edge of the field, honoring the pact that had saved them. Grace grew older, her hair streaked with silver, but she never left Ashfield. She became the town's unofficial historian and guardian, the keeper of stories and warnings. Children would gather at her porch on stormy nights, begging for tales of the hollow. She always told the truth, never embellishing, never downplaying the horror, always ending with Maya's words, "Never dig too deep." Evelyn moved away, unable to bear the memories, but she and Grace exchanged letters every autumn. Evelyn's life was quieter, but she never forgot the darkness beneath Ashfield. Sometimes, she'd wake from dreams of tunnels and chains, her hand clutching at her throat, the taste of dust and iron in her mouth. For a time, peace held. The nightmares faded, the fields flourished, and the children of Ashfield grew up unafraid of the dark. The hollow's hunger was a memory, a cautionary tale. But evil, once awakened, is never truly gone. One bitter winter, a new family arrived in Ashfield. The father was a developer, eager to revitalize the town. He saw only empty land and the promise of profit. He dismissed the warnings, laughed at the old stories, and hired a crew to survey the field above the mine. Grace pleaded with him, showing him the memorial, the records, the scars on her own hands. He waved her away, impatient. "Superstition," he said. "The past is dead." The first night the surveyors broke ground, the wind changed. It howled through the streets, rattling windows and sending animals scurrying for shelter. Grace stood at her door, heart pounding, watching as clouds boiled over the hills and lightning flickered in the distance. That night, she dreamed of Maya, her face pale and urgent, her eyes filled with sorrow. "You promised," Maya whispered. "You must warn them. The hollow remembers." Grace woke up gasping, the locket cold against her chest. The next morning, the surveyors were gone. Their equipment was found abandoned, half buried in mud. The only trace of them was a set of footprints leading to the center of the field, ending abruptly at a patch of earth that seemed darker than the rest, damp, as if freshly turned, though no rain had fallen. The developer left town soon after, his face drawn, his hands shaking. He never spoke of what he saw, but he never returned. Grace gathered the townspeople. They rebuilt the fence, planted more wildflowers, and renewed their vow. The hollow would remain sealed, its secrets undisturbed. The children learned to respect the warnings, and the story of Maya and the masked one became a legend, one told with reverence, not fear. But sometimes, on the coldest nights, the wind would carry a faint knocking from beneath the earth, and those who listened closely could hear a voice, soft, mournful, but resolute, reminding them that some darknesses never truly die. Never dig too deep, never forget. The hollow is always hungry.